Veteran bought a haunted cabin for $500. What his dog found inside shocked the town. The wind screamed through the pines of Cedar Hollow like a living thing, dragging needles and ice across the cabin walls. Jack Merrin leaned into the cold, his gloved hands gripping the doorframe as the storm swallowed the last trace of daylight. The cabin creaked, old timbers bending under the mountain's breath. He shut the door, sealing out the roar, and for a moment there was only silence and the faint sound of his own breathing. $500. That was all it had cost him. A forgotten cabin on a forgotten mountain. The kind of place no one wanted because of what they said had happened there. But Jack wasn't looking for peace or comfort. He wanted quiet, enough of it to drown out the echoes that still followed him from Afghanistan. He set his duffel on the floor and crouched near the fireplace. The stone hearth was wide, built from dark granite, streaked with soot. He stacked the wood and struck a match. The flame caught slow, crawling across the bark, finally blooming into a soft orange glow. For the first time all day, warmth crept into the room. Behind him, Ranger stretched. The German shepherd's coat shimmered bronze and black in the firelight, his muscles tight beneath the fur. 9 years of service had honed him into something precise, almost mechanical, until his eyes met Jack's. There was no machine in those eyes, only patience and a kind of loyalty that made the cabin feel less empty. "First night, partner," Jack said quietly. "No gunfire, no orders, just us." Ranger blinked once, slow and deliberate, then lowered his head onto his paws. For a while, the only sounds were the crackle of burning pine and the storm's low moan outside. Then, without warning, Ranger's ears pricked. He lifted his head, nose twitching. A low rumble started deep in his throat. Jack froze. "What is it?" Ranger rose to his feet, tail rigid, eyes fixed not on the window or the door, but on the fireplace. The growl deepened. Jack frowned. "Easy, it's just the wind." Ranger took 2 measured steps forward, muscles coiling. Then he barked, sharp and loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. He wasn't panicking. It was a warning. Jack's pulse jumped. "Ranger, hey, stop!" But the dog ignored him. He pressed his nose to the base of the hearth, sniffing hard, then began to scrape at the mortar with his claws. The sound was metallic, harsh, echoing off the logs. "Ranger!" Jack's voice cut through the cabin. The dog didn't even look back. His movements were focused, almost surgical. Jack recognized that stance. It was the same one from the desert, when Ranger had stopped him from stepping on an IED buried beneath the sand. He set down the poker, knelt beside him. "What do you see, boy?" Ranger's paw hit the same slab again. The mortar there looked newer, smoother than the rest. Jack brushed the surface. It was cold, even near the flames. The edges formed a faint outline, a separate piece of stone, not part of the foundation. A chill ran through him. "You've got to be kidding me." Outside, the storm howled louder, rattling the windows. The fire flickered, casting shadows that crawled across the walls. Jack fetched his crowbar from the supply crate. The metal was icy in his hand. "All right, let's see what's hiding in my $500 bargain." He wedged the bar into the seam and pushed. The stone groaned but didn't move. He adjusted, bracing with both arms, and shoved harder. A crack split through the air, followed by a sound like breath escaping the ground. Cold air poured from the opening, sharp and metallic, smelling of rust and soil. Ranger stiffened, hackles up. Jack leaned closer, flashlight beam slicing into the narrow gap. Beneath the slab, a hollow space, barely large enough for a man to crawl through. Dust clung to the beam like fog. Something glinted, a metal box half buried, and beside it something else. Cloth brown and shredded. He reached in and brushed it lightly. It wasn't cloth, it was skin, leathery and dry, the curve of a human hand. Jack staggered back, the flashlight trembling in his grasp. The air in the cabin seemed to thin. He'd seen death before, more than he ever wanted, but never like this, buried under his own floor. Ranger let out a deep, guttural growl that rolled through the small room. His body blocked the hearth, every muscle tense. Jack forced himself to move. He crouched again, pulled the box out from the hole. It was heavy, edges corroded, no lock. Inside lay old notebooks, their pages yellowed, bound with string. On the top, a name written in faded ink, Henry Lake. Jack's breath caught. He remembered the name vaguely, some journalist who'd gone missing years ago. He looked down at Ranger. "You just dug up a goddamn cold case." Before he could open the first notebook, the wind outside shifted. The window panes shuddered violently. Ranger's ears snapped towards the door. His growl changed, lower, quieter, like something meant to warn, not threaten. Jack turned off the flashlight and moved to the window. The glass was frosted, the world beyond a blur of white. But in that moving haze, something flickered. A tall shape, motionless among the trees. He blinked. The shape was gone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was listening. Jack reached down, resting his hand on Ranger's neck. The dog's fur bristled beneath his fingers, heart pounding fast and steady. "Whatever this is," Jack whispered, "we're not running from it." The fire crackled, weak and uneven. Outside, the storm roared like the mountain itself was angry. Inside, the air from the open cavity still rose cold and steady, carrying the faint smell of metal and earth. Ranger didn't bark again. He just stood there, watching the door, eyes bright and unblinking, like he was guarding something the world wasn't ready to face. And through the howl of the wind, Jack thought he heard it again. Faint, deliberate. A single crunch of snow. Then another. Footsteps. The storm swallowed the sound as quickly as it came, leaving only the fire's whisper and the slow, measured breathing of the dog beside him. Ranger didn't look away from the door. Neither did Jack, because in Cedar Hollow, even the dead didn't rest easy. The storm had died by morning, leaving the mountain buried under a thick quilt of snow. Smoke drifted from the cabin's chimney as Jack loaded his backpack and called for Ranger. The shepherd padded over, head low, eyes sharp. His gait was smooth, silent, like a soldier back on patrol. "Come on, buddy, let's meet the neighbors." The road down to Cedar Hollow wound through pines bent under the weight of snow. Jack's truck growled down the frozen path, tires crunching. The town appeared suddenly out of the trees, a handful of weather-beaten buildings, a diner, a gas pump, and a general store with one flickering neon sign. When Jack stepped out, conversations died. A couple of men by the hardware store turned away. An old woman across the street pulled her scarf tighter. Cedar Hollow wasn't the kind of place that welcomed strangers, and definitely not the kind that forgot its ghosts. He crossed the street toward a small cafe, its windows fogged from the heat inside. Ranger followed at his heel, every step disciplined. A bell jingled when Jack pushed open the door. Warm air and the smell of coffee hit him. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, dark hair streaked with silver, an apron tied neatly around her waist. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the stranger with the dog. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." He sat by the window, the wood chair creaking under his weight. Ranger settled beside him, chin on paws, watching the door like it was a perimeter. The woman poured a cup and slid it across. "You're the one who bought the old Merrin cabin." "Wasn't much of a bidding war," Jack said. "Place looked abandoned." "It was," she replied quietly. "For 15 years. She paused, studying him. "What made you want to buy that?" Jack shrugged. "Needed somewhere quiet, somewhere cheap." Her eyes darkened. Quiet's not what that cabin gives, Mr. Merrin, Jack Merrin. I'm Nora, she said. That house belonged to Henry Lake, reporter. Used to come in here every morning for black coffee and pie. Then one day he stopped showing up. Sheriff said he must have fallen in the river during the flood. But folks around here... She hesitated. Folks don't believe that. Jack's stomach tightened. What do they believe? That he got too close to something, she said, lowering her voice. He'd been asking questions about North Canyon Energy before he disappeared. The name pricked at Jack's memory. He'd seen it on one of the corroded documents inside, the metal box. What kind of questions? About the water, Nora said. People started getting sick, cattle dying. Sheriff Hale said it was natural runoff, but Henry didn't buy it. Said he'd found proof. Then one night, gone. No body. Just blood on his porch. The door creaked open behind them, letting in a rush of cold air. Nora's voice stopped mid-sentence. Two men entered, broad shoulders, heavy boots, the kind of posture that came from carrying guns. They looked at Jack, then at Ranger. The taller one smirked. Didn't know anyone was dumb enough to move into that ghost box, he said. Jack met his gaze, calm. Guess you know it well. The man grinned, but didn't answer. Ranger stood, body tense, a low vibration in his chest. The shorter man took a step forward, then froze as Ranger's teeth bared, a silent promise. Hey, Nora snapped. Not here, Luke, not today. The two men lingered a second longer before leaving. The bell rang again, sharp in the quiet. Jack exhaled slowly. Nora wiped the counter, voice low. That's Sheriff Hale's nephew. Works for North Canyon Security. Don't give him a reason. Jack nodded. Appreciate the coffee. When he stood, Nora reached out, touching his sleeve. If you find anything in that cabin, anything that doesn't feel right, leave it buried. Some things in Cedar Hollow don't like the light. Outside, the air bit like glass. Jack climbed into his truck, Ranger hopping into the passenger seat. The shepherd turned once, eyes scanning the street before settling. Yeah, Jack murmured. They're friendly, all right. The road back was steep, the sun dipping behind the ridge as he drove. When he reached the cabin, shadows stretched long across the snow. The wind was still, too still. Inside, the fire had gone out. The room smelled of cold ash and something metallic. Jack set his pack down and pulled out the box again. He sat by the table, opened one of the notebooks. The handwriting was tight and rushed, ink faded but readable. April 9th. They're dumping into the creek again. Water's running black. Samples taken. If this doesn't reach the right hands, it ends here. He turned the page. May 2nd. North Canyon's buying silence. Sheriff's in their pocket. They think I'm scared. If I disappear, tell them to look beneath the hearth. Beneath the hearth. Jack's throat went dry. Henry Lake had written those words 15 years ago. The final page stopped him cold. If I don't make it back, the truth lies in the ground. Don't let them bury it again. Jack closed the notebook, staring into the dying fire. The shadows along the walls seemed to shift. Ranger's ears flicked towards the window. A distant sound cut through the night, the hum of an engine. Headlights flashed briefly through the trees, sweeping across the cabin, then vanished. Ranger rose, growl low and deliberate, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond the glass. Jack stood slowly, hand resting on the rifle by the door. Outside, only darkness. But the silence was wrong again, thick, expectant. He looked down at the dog. Someone's out there. Ranger's tail lowered, his stance narrowing. The kind of posture that meant danger wasn't coming. It was already here. A branch snapped in the distance. The sound echoed once, then faded. Jack waited, breath held, until only the wind remained. When he finally sat back down, he didn't open the notebook again. He didn't need to. Somewhere in that forest, someone already knew he had it. Ranger didn't move from the window. His reflection in the glass looked almost human. Eyes bright, shoulders taut, a sentinel carved out of patience and instinct. And as the fire burned low, Cedar Hollow's darkness pressed in closer, whispering the same warning Nora had given him. Some things in this town didn't stay buried. They waited. The snow came again that night, soft and steady, until the world outside vanished into a white hush. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Jack sat in his chair, boots off, rifle within reach. The notebooks lay open on the table beside him, pages fluttering slightly in the draft. Ranger was stretched out near the hearth, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but never asleep. For a long while, there was peace. The kind that made Jack forget about the years he'd spent listening for mortars, footsteps, the click of metal in the dark. The mountain seemed finally still. Then came the first knock, a faint, hollow thud beneath the floorboards. Soft, almost polite. Jack froze. His breath misted in the cold air. He waited, every sense sharpening, but there was only silence again. He leaned forward, scanning the walls, the windows. Nothing. Ranger's eyes opened, golden in the dim light. His ears tilted, then locked on the ground near the hearth. Jack whispered, "You heard that too." The second knock came louder, 3 beats this time, slow, deliberate, like someone tapping from inside the earth. Ranger was on his feet now, body rigid. He stepped toward the hearth, nose twitching. A low growl rippled through him. Jack stood and moved closer, his pulse quickening. "No way, we sealed that up." The hole they'd uncovered 2 nights before was covered again, temporary wood boards screwed into place. Jack had planned to dig further in daylight, maybe check for a basement, but now the sound came straight from below that patch of floor. Another knock. This time, closer. Jack's hand went instinctively to his sidearm. He crouched, ear near the boards, and listened. The sound stopped the moment he leaned in. The silence after it felt alive. "Jesus," he muttered. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead though the air was freezing. Ranger circled the spot, nose pressed to the cracks. He barked once, short, sharp, not fear, but command. Jack had seen that bark in combat zones. It meant contact. "Something's under there," he said, almost to himself. The knocks didn't return, but neither did the calm. All night, Ranger stood guard by the hearth, eyes fixed on that patch of floor as if daring it to move again. Jack sat up with him, too tense to sleep, the wind whispering through the eaves like distant voices. When dawn came, pale light spilled through the frosted windows. Jack rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe it had all been in his head. PTSD did things like that. Sounds, shadows, even smells that didn't belong. Maybe it was just his mind replaying old fears in new shapes. But when he stepped outside, reality hit harder than any ghost. Footprints. Not his, not Ranger's. A different set, human, heavy, pressed deep into the fresh snow. They started near the porch, circled the cabin, and stopped by the back window. Whoever it was had stood there a long time. The prints were sunk deep, melted slightly from body heat. Then the trail continued towards the tree line and vanished. Jack crouched beside the prints. The pattern was strange. Standard work boots, but the left heel was worn down more than the right. He knew the gait of a man who'd walked uneven ground all his life. This wasn't some kid trespassing. It was someone trained to move quiet. "Ranger," he called softly. The dog trotted out, nose to the snow, sniffing the air. His tail stiffened. He followed the scent to the edge of the clearing, then stopped cold, staring into the pines. Jack scanned the tree line, just white and shadow, but there, faintly, a shimmer, sunlight glinting off something metallic before disappearing behind the branches. "Get back," Jack whispered. They retreated to the cabin. Jack locked the door, slid the rifle's bolt, and went straight to the radio. No signal. The mountain still ate frequencies like it ate light. He sat again at the table, staring at the notebooks. Henry Lake had written about evidence, samples, about people watching him. The sheriff? The company? Maybe Henry hadn't disappeared. Maybe someone made sure he did. Jack flipped open another notebook, scanning quickly. Halfway through, a line stopped him cold. They come at night. First the knocks, then the silence. He felt the blood drain from his face. Ranger whined softly, pressing his head against Jack's knee. The touch steadied him. "Not this time, buddy," Jack said. "We're not running from ghosts." He grabbed his coat and stepped outside again. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling like ash. He followed the footprints one last time, crouching near where they ended. Something dark jutted from the snow, half a cigarette, still warm. Jack crushed it under his boot. Whoever had been out there hadn't gone far. That night, he set tripwire bells near the door and windows, a habit he hadn't used since the war. Ranger paced the floor, restless. When Jack finally sat by the fire, fatigue pressing at him, the dog refused to lie down. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. The air grew heavy again. Then 3 knocks, this time from beneath the boards, sharp and precise. Ranger lunged forward, teeth bared. Jack leapt up, flashlight cutting across the floor. The boards rattled once, then went still. He waited, muscles tight, listening. No wind, no footsteps, just the sound of Ranger's breathing, fast and deep. Jack reached down, hand brushing the dog's collar. "It's not in my head." Ranger's gaze stayed fixed on the floor. The sound didn't come back, but the dread stayed. Jack sat awake till sunrise, staring at the place where the knocks had been. When light finally touched the windows, he noticed something he'd missed before. A smear of dirt near the hearth, shaped like a handprint, small and faint, pressed against the inside of the board. Someone, or something, had been trying to get out. The knock came mid-morning, sharp and deliberate against the old cabin door. Jack froze, coffee halfway to his lips. Ranger's head snapped up from the hearth, a low growl rising from deep in his chest. Through the frosted glass, Jack could make out a bulky silhouette in a tan jacket. A county SUV sat idling by the gate, the sheriff's star glinting on its door. He opened up. Sheriff Rickson Hale stood there, a man carved from the same cold granite as the mountains around them. His hat dripped melted snow, and his expression was the kind that never changed, calm, unreadable, slightly amused. "Mornin', Mr. Merrin," he said. "Mind if I come in?" Jack stepped aside. "Guess I don't have much of a choice." Hale entered, eyes sweeping the room, landing briefly on Ranger. The shepherd didn't move, but didn't back down either. He stood by the hearth, tail still, muscles tight. "Nice dog," Hale said, voice casual. "Military breed?" "Yeah," Jack replied. "Served with me overseas." "Smart animal, I can tell." Hale's gaze drifted to the corner of the room where the floorboards met the stone hearth, the same spot Jack had resealed after the knocks. "Mind if I sit?" Jack gestured to the chair. Hale didn't take it. Instead, he leaned against the table, folded his arms. "Got a report from one of my deputies last night. Someone thought they saw lights up this way. Maybe an intruder. Thought I'd check it out." "Wasn't anyone but me," Jack said. Hale nodded slowly. "You sure? Place like this?" "Well, it draws stories, strange ones." Jack met his eyes. "Like what?" The sheriff smiled faintly. "Like how the last man who owned this cabin went missing. Henry Lake, right? Reporter. always poking around where he shouldn't. Ranger growled, soft but clear. Hale didn't flinch, but his gaze flicked toward the dog, then back to Jack. "You found anything interesting here?" Hale asked. "Old cabins like this tend to have surprises." Jack felt the weight of the metal box sitting under the table, hidden by a blanket. "Just mice. And bad insulation." Hale's eyes lingered on him a moment too long. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo, faded, edges curled. He set it down on the table between them. It was Henry Lake, smiling in front of the very same cabin, holding a notebook in one hand and a shovel in the other. Behind him, the snow was falling. The date on the back read 15 years ago. Jack stared at it. "Where'd you get this?" "Town records," Hale said. Henry liked digging for truth. Always did. Shame what happened to him. "What did happen to him?" The sheriff smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "Depends on who you ask. Some say he fell through the ice. Others say the mountain took him. You know how small towns are. We make peace with mystery." He picked up the photo again, brushing imaginary dust off its surface. "You've got that same look, Mr. Merrin, the kind that doesn't leave things buried." Jack crossed his arms. "If I dig anything up, I'll make sure to let you know." Hale studied him for a long moment. The air between them thickened. Finally, he said quietly, "Let me give you some advice. Cedar Hollow's not a place that forgives curiosity. People here like their ghosts undisturbed." Ranger's growl deepened, echoing through the small cabin. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that made men reconsider their next word. Hale glanced down at him, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Control your dog, son." Jack didn't move. He only growls when he smells trouble. For a second, the sheriff's eyes flickered. Amusement or irritation, Jack couldn't tell. Then he straightened his coat, adjusted his hat. "Well," Hale said, stepping toward the door, "I'll leave you to your peace and quiet. But remember, around here, men who go digging into old graves usually end up in one." He paused on the porch, looking back. The wind caught his voice as he added, "In Cedar Hollow, whoever touches the past gets buried with it." The door shut behind him. His SUV's tires crunched away through the snow until the sound faded completely. For a while, Jack just stood there, the silence pressing down. Then he exhaled, slow and measured, turning toward Ranger. The shepherd was still staring at the hearth, ears up, body alert. His gaze didn't shift even as Jack knelt beside him. "What now?" Jack murmured. Ranger's nose twitched. Then came a sound. Soft at first, almost part of the wind. 3 slow knocks from beneath the floor. Jack's skin went cold, the same rhythm as before. Ranger barked once, sharp, commanding. The fire flickered violently, casting shadows that jumped across the walls. Jack reached for the crowbar, hesitating, then stopped. Not yet. Whoever, or whatever, was beneath that floor wanted him to act. Instead, he crouched, hand brushing Ranger's back. We wait. Let them make the next move. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves. But under it all, the sound came again. 3 dull, measured knocks, as if someone far below was answering back. Ranger stayed by the hearth all night, silent and unblinking, while Jack watched the door, the photo of Henry Lake lying face up on the table, his smile now looking more like a warning than a memory. By dawn, Jack could no longer ignore what waited beneath the floor. The 3 knocks had stopped, but the silence left behind felt heavier than before, like a held breath. He pulled on his gloves, grabbed the crowbar, and nodded to Ranger. The shepherd was already alert, pacing near the hearth, tail stiff, gaze locked on the same spot. "All right, buddy," Jack muttered. "Let's find out what they buried." The first strike cracked through the cabin. Dust rose, curling in the dim morning light. The second swing split the wood. After the third, the board gave way, revealing a pocket of black space. The smell hit him first. Metallic, stale, and faintly chemical. Ranger whined, ears flattened. Jack shone a flashlight into the hole. Wooden beams framed a small chamber, barely large enough to crouch in. Inside sat a rusted metal chest, sealed with 2 corroded latches. His pulse quickened. He pried it open. Glass vials rolled forward, clinking against one another. Each was labeled with faded dates, coordinates, and handwritten notes. There were also stacks of paper, maps of the surrounding mines and creek systems, along with a worn leather journal. The name Henry Lake was etched across its cover. Jack climbed out and spread everything across the table. He flipped open the journal. The handwriting was precise, hurried, growing more desperate across the pages. March 11th, North Canyon's waste is bleeding into the groundwater. Heavy metals confirmed in samples. Sheriff Hale says to stop digging. Told him I'd go to the EPA. He laughed. Jack turned the page. April 7th, received threats. They know I've been collecting evidence. The company's trucks run after dark, dumping barrels upstream. I've marked their routes on the map. If this journal is found, follow the red lines. He looked at the maps again. Red ink circled an area less than 2 miles from the cabin, labeled Creek Site 7. Another page stopped him. May 2nd. I think Hale's on their payroll. I heard a vehicle outside last night. Rangers barking saved me once before when I covered war zones. I wish I had him here now. Jack exhaled slowly. That last line hit like a stone in the gut. Henry had been alone, fighting a machine bigger than him, and it killed him. Ranger's bark broke the stillness. Short, sharp, urgent. Jack snapped the journal shut and stood. What is it? Ranger was at the window, posture tight, gaze fixed down the slope. A low growl rippled through him, rising into a deep warning bark. Jack followed his line of sight. Through the swirling flakes of snow, headlights glared. A black SUV crawled up the narrow road, engine humming low. It stopped just short of the gate. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a dark coat that looked out of place in the wilderness. His movements were calm, practiced, like someone used to owning every room he entered. He stood for a moment, surveying the cabin, then walked toward it. Jack's stomach tightened. He didn't need an introduction to know who it was. He'd seen the name stamped on the documents in Henry's box. Silas Ward. He muttered. Ward's knock wasn't hesitant. 3 quick raps, confident and rhythmical. Jack opened the door but didn't invite him in. Morning, Mr. Merrin, Ward said pleasantly, his voice deep, smooth. Beautiful view you've got here. Depends who's looking. Jack replied. Ward smiled like he'd rehearsed it. I hear you came across some old records, belonged to one of my former employees. Henry Lake, was it? Reporter, not employee. Ward chuckled softly. Right, I suppose you could call him that. He had an obsessive interest in our company. Tragic how he disappeared. Jack didn't answer. Ranger stood beside him, unmoving, gaze fixed on the man's gloved hands. Ward's eyes flicked towards the dog. Beautiful animal. Shepherd, yes? Service-trained, I assume. More than that. Jack said. He knows when someone's lying. Ward tilted his head, the smile never fading. Then he must be very busy around here. He took a slow step forward, boots crunching on the porch. I came to make you an offer. I'll buy this cabin from you, 10 times what you paid. Not for sale. Ward's tone remained light. Think about it, Mr. Merrin. Remote property, old mine beneath, contaminated groundwater. Not exactly a safe investment. North Canyon can handle the cleanup. You can walk away richer, and no one has to get hurt. Jack's jaw clenched. You always make offers like that right before you send someone to do the hurting? For the first time, Ward's smile cracked. You've got a sharp tongue for a man living alone in the woods. Ranger stepped forward, a deep growl vibrating through the floorboards. Ward's eyes shifted to him, then back to Jack. Control your animal. Jack didn't move. He's just reading the room. Ward's mask slipped completely then. His voice lost its charm. Henry Lake thought he could expose us too. You should have seen what was left of him after he tried. He turned toward the SUV, pausing just before he reached it. If I were you, Mr. Merrin, I'd stop digging. The ground here has a way of swallowing men whole. The SUV door slammed. Tires spun against the snow, kicking up a flurry of white before disappearing down the road. Jack stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping into his bones. Ranger pressed close against his leg, eyes still locked on the empty gate. Yeah, Jack whispered. I don't think he came for small. Talk. Inside, the fire hissed as if it had caught its breath. Jack reopened Henry's journal, the inked words blurring slightly under his shaking hands. If I disappear, the truth lies in the ground. He looked toward the map again. Creek Site 7. 2 miles east, the last place Henry Lake had marked. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of distant engines somewhere beyond the tree line. Jack moved to the window. The forest was quiet now, too quiet. He knelt beside Ranger, hand resting on the dog's shoulder. We're not running, are we? Ranger's steady eyes met his, the answer silent but certain. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It had just been waiting for someone, and something, to dig it back up. The storm clouds had rolled back, leaving the mountains glazed in white under a cold afternoon sun. For a few hours, the world outside the cabin felt still. Too still. Jack sat at the table with Henry Lake's files spread open before him, the air thick with the smell of old paper and wood smoke. Ranger lay near the door, one ear cocked, eyes half open but ready. Jack had been tracing the red lines Henry had drawn on the map when the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Ranger was up before Jack could stand, his growl low and steady. The same black SUV from earlier crawled up the drive, sunlight flashing off its windshield. Jack muttered, "You just can't stay away, can you?" He holstered his sidearm and opened the door before Ward could knock. The man was already halfway up the steps, perfectly composed, snow dusting his coat like ash. "Mr. Merrin," Ward said with a measured smile, "I hope I'm not intruding." "You are," Jack replied, "but I'm curious what lie brings you back this time." Ward's laugh was quiet, polite, like he'd practiced it in a boardroom. "I don't deal in lies, Jack, just opportunities." Ranger stepped forward, blocking the doorway. His presence alone shifted the tone. Ward hesitated before continuing, his eyes flicking to the shepherd's teeth. "I'll be brief," Ward said. "You found something that doesn't belong to you. Documents, samples, whatever you think they mean. They're remnants of a dead story. I'm here to buy them back. And the property." "Not for sale," Jack said flatly. Ward's smile didn't fade, but his voice softened, almost paternal. 10 times what you paid. Cash, no questions asked. You could be gone by tomorrow morning." Jack didn't move. "You think money's what keeps me here?" Ward studied him, hands tucked neatly in his coat pockets. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Merrin, even idealists, especially the broken ones." Ranger's growl deepened. The sound filled the space between them like the promise of violence. Ward glanced down at the dog, his jaw tightening. The first shot came just after midnight, buried inside the roar of the storm. Jack barely heard it, just the sharp crack that followed the wind's howl. A window shattered. Splinters of glass scattered across the floor. Ranger was already moving, teeth bared, hackles high. "Down!" Jack hissed, diving behind the table. A second shot slammed into the wall. Then another. Muffled footsteps circled the cabin. The sound was rhythmic, trained, too coordinated to be anything but professionals. Outside, the blizzard had swallowed the world in white. The night pulsed with wind and gunfire. Jack's instincts clicked in like muscle memory from a lifetime ago. He crawled to the corner, grabbed his rifle, and checked the chamber. Ranger was crouched low, body coiled tight, waiting for a signal. Through the shattered window, Jack caught a flicker of movement. Figures in white camo moving between trees. 4, maybe 5. No headlights, no lights at all. They were ghosts in the snow. He whispered, "They came to finish it." Ranger growled once, deep and restrained. Jack gave a silent hand signal, flat palm, 2 taps, then point toward the floor. The shepherd turned instantly, heading toward the hearth. His nails clicked softly against the wood as he pawed the floor panel loose, revealing the crawl space below. "Good boy," Jack whispered. He grabbed the rucksack with Henry's files, the vials, and the map, slung it across his shoulder, and followed. Bullets punched through the walls as he dropped into the darkness, pulling the hatch closed above them. The tunnel was narrow, stale with damp air. Ranger led the way, his body low, muscles rippling under his coat. The sound of gunfire above was muffled now, replaced by the rhythmic thud of boots and breaking wood. The cabin was being torn apart. After 50 feet, the tunnel opened to the tree line behind the ridge. Jack pushed the exit hatch slowly, snow cascading down as it gave way. The storm was a white blur. Visibility less than 10 yards. Perfect cover. He scanned the clearing, saw 2 of them flanking the cabin from opposite sides. He raised his rifle, waited for the wind to rise, then fired once. One of the men dropped instantly. Ranger lunged forward through the snow, vanishing into the storm. Seconds later, a strangled cry cut through the wind, then silence. "Attaboy," Jack muttered. He moved low, circling to the back. Another figure appeared through the whiteout, scanning with a flashlight. Jack waited, breathing steady, then came up behind him, slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's shoulder, and tackled him into the snow. The gun flew from his hands. Ranger reappeared, teeth bared, growling over the man's throat. Jack pressed his knee into the man's chest. "Who sent you?" The mercenary struggled, coughing blood into the snow. "You already know." "Say it." "Ward," the man gasped. "He wants it gone. The files, the water samples, everything." Jack stared down at him, fury burning cold in his chest. "How many?" "6. Ranger's snarl deepened. The man froze, hands trembling. Jack stood, motioning for the dog to back off. "You picked the wrong side." The man tried to speak, but a gunshot cracked through the storm. His body went limp. A sniper's round had found him. Jack ducked instinctively, scanning the ridge. Through the blur of snow, a faint muzzle flash gave away the shooter's position. "Move!" he ordered. Ranger sprinted beside him as they dashed for cover behind a fallen tree. Bullets chewed into bark and snow around them. Jack keyed his old field radio, the one he'd kept since deployment. Static hissed. Then a faint voice broke through, tired and familiar. "This is Clara Reeves. Who's calling?" "It's Merrin," Jack said, breath fogging in the freezing air. "Got something you'll want. Files from Henry Lake. Proof of water contamination by North Canyon. They're trying to erase it." "Merrin? Jesus, Jack. You're supposed to be dead." "Working on it," he said dryly. "I'm transmitting the data now. Secure it. If you don't hear from me in an hour, drop it to every outlet you've got." "Copy that," Clara replied. "Stay alive long enough to make it worth printing." Jack managed a faint grin. "That's the plan." He slid the encrypted drive into the transmitter on the radio, watching the signal light blink weakly before stabilizing. "It's sending." A shadow moved behind him. Ranger barked, launching forward, tackling a man who had crept up through the snow. The gun went off, muzzle flash lighting the storm. Jack spun and fired twice. The attacker fell, rifle slipping from his grasp. The radio crackled. "Transmission received," Clara said. "Jack, they'll come hard now. You need to disappear." Too late. Jack muttered, watching as flames began to lick the edges of the cabin in the distance. The bastards were burning it to the ground. He looked down at Ranger, whose fur was dusted white, eyes bright and steady. "Looks like we've still got a fight left in us, partner." Ranger barked once, sharp and resolute. As the wind howled and the fire rose behind them, Jack and Ranger vanished back into the blizzard. One man and his dog moving like ghosts through the snow, carrying the truth the world had tried to bury. The snow came in sheets, each gust pushing the world a little further away. Jack and Ranger crouched behind the fallen spruce, where the tunnel had spit them out. The cabin glowed dull orange through the whiteout, a wounded heart beating in the storm. Then the glow sharpened, brightened, roared. Fire took the porch first, engines, more than one. Headlights knifed through the trees, then went dark at the edge of the clearing. Doors opened and closed with the quiet certainty of men who had done this before. Ranger's body went rigid, the kind of stillness that wasn't fear. It was calculation. A voice carried in the wind, smooth and unhurried. Silas Ward. No radio barked orders, no shouted numbers, just a man leading his own cleanup crew. "Burn it," Ward said. "Start with the roof. Push them to the back." Bottles arced out of the white. The first broke against the eaves. Flame licked upward. The second crashed through the broken front window and rolled across the floor. The cabin bloomed into full, angry light. Boards cracked. The chimney belched smoke and sparks. "They're trying to smoke us out," Jack whispered. He eased the rifle to his shoulder and glanced at Ranger. One hand signal. Hold. The shepherd didn't so much as twitch, but his eyes cut to the left, then right, mapping the movement Jack couldn't yet see. Two figures peeled off from the main group and started around the north side, rifles low, heads tucked. Jack waited for their steps to line up with the wind. He squeezed. One dropped. The other dove, rolled, fired blind into the trees. "Cover!" Jack hissed. He and Ranger split, moving silent through knee-deep powder. The fire's heat hit their faces even from the tree line. The old cabin groaned like a living thing. They reached the rear clearing where the tunnel hatch lay half buried. Footprints crossed it. Someone had found the exit, then moved on, convinced their prey had already fled. Jack took a breath and risked a look back. Men in white camo moved in a ring, and at the center, framed by the fire, stood Ward in his dark coat, watching like this was a boardroom presentation. Beside him, Sheriff Rickson Hale. The sight hit harder than the wind. Hale wasn't surprised or ashamed. He was talking low to Ward and pointing at the ridge like he was laying out a hunting map. Ranger's lip lifted. Jack felt the same surge of heat and swallowed it down. Anger got you killed in weather like this. A flash burned through the snow to their right. A round cracked past Jack's ear. He dropped, rolled behind a stump, and returned 2 shots. The shooter went quiet. The storm shifted, a brief slackening that gave Jack a clean lane. He saw 3 more men spread wide, stepping in time with the fire's collapse. They were herding him toward a choke point. Hale's finger traced the same shape Ward's men were moving to make. A funnel. End it fast. No loose ends. Jack slid the radio from his chest rig and keyed it hard. "Clara, if you've got anything left, now's the time." Static rattled. Then her voice cut in, tight with motion. "Already airborne. Shared everything with the Bureau 2 hours ago. They're en route. You need to stay visible enough to be found and alive enough to give a statement." Working on the second part. He glanced at the cabin. The roof caved at one corner. The fire roared high and angry, lighting the snow in a sick orange. Ranger pressed against his knee, then broke away at Jack's hand signal. Low crawl, flank right. The shepherd vanished into the tree shadows, a grey ghost moving with purpose. Jack moved left, drawing eyes, letting the fire paint his outline just enough for the impatient to fire. Bullets chewed, snow where his legs had been a heartbeat ago. A man charged through the smoke, breath sawing, rifle up. Ranger hit him from the side with a violence honed in 100 drills and 2 wars. The rifle spun into the snow. Ranger's jaws locked on the forearm. The man buckled, choking out a shout that died into a wet grunt when Jack's rifle butt met his jaw. "Where is Ward?" Jack asked. The man's eyes flicked toward the fire. "Middle, with Hale. He said to light the back door, then sweep the ridge. He wants you on the ground for him." A shot hit the stump and threw bark across Jack's face. He dropped the man and sprinted. Ranger stayed tight on his hip, blood on his muzzle that steamed in the cold. The back of the cabin gave way, a curtain of flame pouring outward. Wind grabbed it and threw sparks into the tree line. The heat hurt. The smoke clawed at their throats. They broke covert across the clearing, and the world narrowed to timing and breath. Jack moved in long, low strides. He counted his steps the way he had when explosions measured the distance between birth and death. 20 to the next fallen log. 10 more to the ditch. Stop! Listen! Move! Ward stepped into the open before them, like a man walking to a microphone. He didn't run. He didn't crouch. He simply raised a pistol and sighted in, the firelight carving hard lines across his face. "End of the line, Mr. Merrin," Ward said. "Hand me the bag." Jack didn't lower his rifle. Bit late to ask nicely. Ward's smile was back, brittle and wrong. "I told you this ground swallows men. You chose to be one of them." The pistol bucked. Jack felt the air move just above his shoulder. He fired back. The shot went wide, stolen by the wind. Ranger exploded forward. Ward pivoted in a clean, practiced half-step and shot the dog. Ranger stumbled. The sound he made wasn't a yelp. It was a short, furious grunt as he gathered himself and kept going. He hit Ward like a storm, teeth finding the shooting arm. Ward screamed, a wild, high noise that didn't fit the rest of him. The pistol fired uselessly into the snow. "Ranger!" Jack shouted. He closed the distance in 3 strides and kicked Ward's wrist. The gun skittered. Hale raised his own weapon from the edge of the firelight. "Don't," Jack said. Hale aimed anyway. A spotlight ripped the night open. The world turned white and loud. Rotor-wash flattened the treetops and sent ash flying. A loudspeaker boomed across the clearing. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. On the ground now." Ward froze, breath heaving, blood pouring from his arm where Ranger's teeth had torn through the coat. Hale's eyes went wide, then small. He didn't drop the gun. He turned it toward Jack like a man settling a grudge. Ranger moved first. He shoved his body between them and planted his feet in the snow, lips peeled back, chest heaving. Hale's aim faltered a fraction. Jack fired. Hale spun and folded into the drifts, his gun tumbling from his hand. Agents in dark parkas flooded the clearing from the trees, rifles steady, voices layered and precise. 2 pinned Ward face down in the snow. Cuffs snapped. Another team peeled to Hale. A third swept the perimeter, stepping around the burning cabin with the detachment of men who had buried too many scenes like this. Jack dropped to his knees in the snow. Ranger stood a second longer, eyes locked on Ward as if the fight could still turn. Then his back legs buckled. He sat hard. He lay down. Jack slid his hands under the dog's chest and felt the heat of blood. It was high on the ribcage, a graze that had cut deep, a line of torn flesh that pumped bright against the cold. Ranger's breath came fast, fogging the night, then slower as Jack pressed down. "Hey," Jack said, and his voice broke. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay." Ranger's eyes found his. The old steadiness was still there. The storm, the fire, the agents barking orders, Ward cursing into the snow, all of it fell away under that look. Jack tore open a field dressing and pressed hard, hands slick, breath shaking. An agent knelt beside him with a medical kit. "We've got him," she said, calm cutting clean through the noise. "Keep your pressure right there." She slid gauze under Jack's hands and wrapped tight. Another agent covered Ranger with a foil blanket that crinkled in the wind. Clara Reeves dropped from the helicopter skid like a woman running on fumes and purpose. Her face was wind-burned, hair jammed under a beanie. She didn't touch Jack, just crouched close enough that he could hear her without shouting. "You did it," she said. Jack didn't look up. He did it. He settled a hand on Ranger's skull, thumb tracing the familiar fur between the ears. "You did it, partner." Ward twisted against his cuffs, teeth chattering with shock and fury. He stared at Jack with the look of a man who couldn't comprehend losing. The spotlight carved him into a statue. Agents walked him past the burning cabin he had ordered destroyed. He flinched when a beam popped and fell, as if the fire finally meant something. Clara stood and faced him as he went by. "You poisoned a town," she said. "You buried a man under someone else's home. You don't get to wash that off." Ward said nothing. The wind took his breath and tossed it away. Ranger's breathing evened, then slipped. Jack felt it change under his hands and leaned closer, his forehead touching Ranger's. The helicopter rotors thumped a slower rhythm now, a heartbeat above the snow. "Easy," Jack whispered. "You're not done. Not here." Ranger's tail moved once, a small brush of approval that hit harder than any shout. His eyes closed halfway, then opened again. He wasn't checking out. He was choosing to rest. The agent with the medkit tightened the wrap one last time and nodded. "He's strong. We can move him. There's a vet on the way to the airstrip. We'll keep him warm and stable till then." Jack let out a breath that shook, then nodded. He slid one arm under Ranger's shoulders and lifted as gently as the night allowed. The dog grunted, leaned into him, and stayed. Behind them, the cabin collapsed inward with a long, tired groan. Sparks rose and vanished into the storm. The sign Jack had carved for the porch flared and went dark. The foundation held, black and stubborn under the snow. Agents led Ward to the waiting snowcat. Hale lay under a silver blanket, eyes open, staring at nothing. The spotlight snapped off. The night returned, soft and crawling with snow. Clara touched Jack's sleeve. "Ambulance sleds ready?" Jack nodded once. He didn't trust himself to speak. He carried Ranger through the drifts, step by step, the heat of the dog's body seeping into his arms. The shepherd's head rested against Jack's chest, breath warm, steady, stubborn. They reached the sled. Jack climbed in and didn't let go. The engine growled to life. The clearing slid away, fire shrinking to a smear of orange behind them. Jack looked down at the dog that had dragged him through 2 wars and 1 haunted mountain. Ranger's eyes were on the horizon, as if he could already see the next ridge, the next line to guard. "Only when the truth is safe," Jack said, not sure if he was promising or praying. Ranger's ear twitched. The sled moved faster. The storm closed around them, thick and cold and bright with the kind of light that meant morning would come. By the time the storm broke, the world looked like a different planet. The forest was quiet again, buried under fresh snow that glowed blue in the pale morning light. Smoke still rose from the blackened skeleton of the cabin, curling toward a sky washed clean by cold wind. FBI field trucks lined the ridge road now, their tires half buried in snow. Men in windbreakers moved through the wreckage, tagging evidence, photographing ash, digging into what remained of the foundation. Every step stirred a faint whisper from the ice, like the mountain was breathing again after holding its breath all night. Jack stood a little apart, coat open, hands shoved deep into his pockets. His face was windburned, eyes red from sleepless hours. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night had long since burned out, leaving only exhaustion and the heavy quiet of survival. Ranger lay on a blanket nearby, his side wrapped tight in fresh bandages. The wound had missed his heart by an inch. A shaved patch of fur revealed the long, angry scar that would never fade. His breathing was steady now, though shallow, his head resting against Jack's boot. Every few minutes his tail thumped once, like punctuation to the silence. Clara Reeves approached from the group of agents near the tape line, her parka zipped up to the chin. She held a tablet under one arm, a half-empty thermos in her hand. Her voice was rough with fatigue, but threaded with relief. "They found it all," she said. "The samples, the logs, even the backup drives Henry buried under the hearth. It's all intact. North Canyon can't bury this anymore." Jack nodded slowly. 15 years too late for Henry. Clara crouched beside Ranger and scratched behind his ear, careful to avoid the stitches. Maybe not too late for what he stood for. His story just needed someone to finish it. Jack looked down at the dog, the way his chest rose and fell under the foil blanket. "He did most of the finishing." Clara smiled faintly. "That's the headline, you know. Not the arrest, not the scandal. It's you two. Veteran and his dog uncover truth behind disappearance of journalist Henry Lake." The networks are eating it up. Jack huffed a quiet laugh. "Guess ghosts make good TV." "Not ghosts," Clara said. "Legacy." She handed him a small evidence bag. Inside, blackened but intact, was Henry's leather journal. "They'll archive the rest for court, but this one's yours. Henry would have wanted it that way." Jack turned the bag over in his hand. The leather was cracked, edges curled, but he could still make out the faint etching of the name. Henry Lake. The man who had died trying to tell the truth now had it spoken for him. A voice from the other side of the site broke through the wind. "Directors ready for transport. Subject secured." Ward was being led down the slope in handcuffs, escorted by 2 agents. His expensive coat hung open, half torn, his expression flat but eyes wild. Hale followed, pale and silent under the same metal cuffs, head bowed against the wind. Ward's gaze locked on Jack for a moment as he passed. The same arrogance lingered, dulled now by shock and the first taste of accountability. "You think this ends with me?" he hissed. Jack didn't move. "No," he said. "It ends with the truth." Ward tried to say something else, but the agent pushed him forward toward the waiting SUV. The door slammed shut. For the first time, Cedar Hollow felt still again. As the sound of engines faded, Clara pulled out her phone and held it toward Jack. "They just ran the story," she said. On the small screen, a live report played from a news van parked at the base of the mountain. The headline scrolled across the bottom. "Montana water scandal exposed. Disgraced CEO and sheriff arrested in 15-year cover-up." Images flashed. Henry Lake's photo, a shot of the old North Canyon energy plant, and then the burning cabin. Finally, a still frame. Jack kneeling in the snow, hand on Ranger's head. The reporter's voice filled the quiet. "Thanks to new evidence recovered from the property of a retired Army veteran, investigators have reopened the case once believed unsolvable. Sources confirm the findings expose illegal dumping of heavy metals into local water sources, a contamination that may have affected hundreds. The truth, long buried, has finally surfaced." Clara lowered the phone. "You should be proud, Jack. Henry searched for the truth, but you and that dog, you made sure it could breathe again." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked out at the line of trees, the snow still falling soft, like ash after a long fire. "He died alone," he said quietly. Nobody listened. I almost did the same thing. But maybe that's how it works. Somebody yells into the dark, and years later, somebody else finally hears it. Ranger stirred at his feet, lifting his head just enough to rest his muzzle against Jack's knee. His eyes were tired but bright, the same deep amber that had seen through fire and storm. Jack reached down and brushed the side of his neck. "You're the one who heard it first," he said softly. Clara stood, tightening her gloves. "You'll both need rest. There's a place in town, Pine Hollow Lodge. Quiet, off the grid. I already booked you a room." Jack looked back at the smoking ruins of the cabin. "Guess I don't have a choice anymore." She smiled. "Nope. You've done enough digging for one lifetime." He gave a faint nod, then bent to slip his arms under Ranger's chest, lifting him carefully. The shepherd's weight was solid, alive. Ranger gave a small grunt of protest, then settled, head against Jack's shoulder. As they walked toward the waiting truck, the morning light spilled over the ridge, cutting through the grey like something alive. For the first time in months, Jack didn't feel the cold. Behind them, an agent called out to Clara. "You coming?" "In a minute," she replied. She turned once more toward the burned-out cabin, then toward Jack and Ranger's fading silhouettes in the snow. Her breath formed a cloud in the thin air. "Henry," she whispered. "They finally listened." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint echo of a bark, low, strong, alive. The truth didn't just survive. It breathed. Spring came late that year to Cedar Hollow, but when it did, it came all at once. Soft rain, wild grass pushing through ash, and sunlight that carried warmth instead of warning. The storm scars were gone. The snow melted into silver streams that ran down the ridges like veins of glass. Where the old cabin had burned, new beams rose. The smell of pine replaced the acrid scent of smoke. Jack worked slowly, deliberately, every nail and plank set by hand. Some days he still caught himself listening for the sound of boots in the snow or the crack of gunfire through the trees. But mostly he listened to the quiet and to the steady breathing beside him. Ranger lay near the porch, half in the sun, half in shadow. The fur along his side had grown back, a thin streak of white tracing the scar that saved them both. His eyes followed Jack wherever he moved, calm but alert, the same watchful sentinel that had stood between him and death more times than Jack could count. Jack hammered the last board into place and stepped back. He hung a small wooden sign over the door, letters carved deep into the grain. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. The words caught the light and seemed to glow against the clean wood. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans and looked out towards the ridge. The snowcaps were still there, distant and eternal, gleaming like the edge of another world. Somewhere beneath them lay the creek, the buried barrels, and the ghosts of the men who thought they could hide what they'd done. He felt Ranger's head press gently against his leg. The dog looked up, eyes reflecting the same mountains. Jack smiled and crouched beside him. "Yeah," he murmured. "We did it. And I guess it's ours now. This place. This story." Footsteps crunched behind them. Jack turned to see a boy, no more than 12, standing shyly at the gate. He was holding a fishing rod and wearing boots too big for him. "Mr. Merrin?" the boy called. Jack raised a hand. "Hey there, kid. You lost?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. My dad said you built this place where that reporter disappeared. He said it was haunted." He hesitated. "Is it true?" Jack chuckled. "Used to be, but not anymore." The boy's eyes drifted to Ranger, who was watching him steadily, tail thumping once. "He's huge," the boy whispered. "Does he ever stop watching?" Jack looked down at the shepherd, then back at the boy. Only when the truth is safe, he said. The boy nodded solemnly, as if that made perfect sense, then waved goodbye and ran back down the trail, laughter echoing between the pines. Jack stood there for a long while after, letting the wind carry the sound away. He turned to Ranger. "You hear that?" "Safe." Ranger didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, ears tilted forward, nose twitching at some distant scent only he could read. Jack knew that look. It wasn't suspicion anymore, it was duty. Later, as dusk began to settle, Jack sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, the world glowing gold and blue around him. Ranger stretched beside him, head resting on his paws. Somewhere far below, a hawk cried, and the creek shimmered in the last light. Clara had called that morning. The trial was over. Ward had pled guilty to conspiracy, obstruction, and corporate negligence. Hale's name would stain the sheriff's office forever. Henry Lake's story was now part of the public record, his voice restored, his evidence preserved in the National Archives. "They'll put your name in it too," Clara had said over the phone. "Yours and Ranger's. People should know who finished what Henry started." Jack had laughed quietly. "He started it. We just made sure it didn't die out there." Now he watched the stars begin to show above the peaks. The sign above the porch caught the light of the lantern and gleamed softly in the wind. Ranger shifted, eyes half closed, but ears still alert. Jack reached over and scratched, behind his neck. "You can rest now, buddy. You've earned it." Ranger's tail brushed the porch once, twice. His eyes drifted shut, but his breathing stayed steady, the deep rhythm of something still guarding, still alive. The night wrapped around them, quiet and clear. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called, and the echo rolled across the valley like a memory. Jack lifted his gaze toward the mountains, white, endless, honest. He whispered, more to the wind than to himself, "Only when the truth is safe." The camera pulls back slowly, the porch growing smaller against the stretch of pine and snow. Ranger lies still, watching, his silhouette framed by the warm light of the rebuilt cabin. The sky deepens to blue, the stars burning steady above the ridge. As the last note of wind fades, white text appears over the dark. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you believe every dog deserves to be heard, shared, and remembered, support the German Shepherd channel today.